Chapter 15. Return to the Lion's Den. I once believed Dawnspire was the safest place in the world. I believed its walls were built not merely of marble and mortar, but of certainty. I believed the light pooled there more purely than anywhere else, distilled, disciplined, sanctified. I believed that when I crossed its threshold, I walked into the center of truth. Now I approached it as one might approach a wound that had never healed. We saw the citadel long before we reached its gates. It rose from the horizon like a blade thrust into the sky. White spires cutting through bruised clouds, golden filigree catching what little sunlight bled through the storm. The banners of the radiant Tribunal snapped in the wind, their lion insignia proud and unyielding. I had once worn that symbol over my heart. Now I felt it pressing against my ribs like a splinter. We stood on a ridge overlooking the valley road. The others waited in silence, letting me be the first to speak, though none of them had asked to follow me this far. They had chosen it. That frightened me more than if they had been ordered. Maren stood at my right, her half-broken gauntlet resting on the pommel of her blade. The metal was cracked across the knuckles, a fracture from Chapter 8 that she refused to repair. She said it reminded her to question the hand that wielded it. Caelan watched the citadel the way he watched a predator's den, not with hatred, but with calculation. His emerald bow, grown from living wood, gleamed faintly even in the dim light. Lysa stood closer than the others, as if proximity could brace me. The fire in her palms flickered nervously, mirroring the unease in my own chest. Bram adjusted the strap on his hammer and exhaled slowly, the breath of a man who had once walked these roads in obedience and left them in disillusionment. And Keth spat over the ridge and grinned without humor. "So," he rumbled, "that's the Lion's Den." "Yes," I said. My voice did not echo the way it once would have. The distortion in the air. We began our descent at dusk. The valley road had once been lined with pilgrims, hopeful faces lifted toward Dawnspire's promise. Now the road lay nearly empty. Those we passed walked quickly, eyes downcast. Shrines along the roadside burned unevenly, some flames guttered sideways as if caught in a wind that did not exist. I felt it before I saw it, the distortion. It pressed against my thoughts like static. Prayer was no longer a reaching upward. It was a negotiation through interference. When I whispered Solon's name, the response came fractured. Not silence, not absence, a flicker. Two overlapping impressions. One warm, weary, sorrowful. The other sharp, directive, absolute. Return, obey, correct the heresy. Then beneath it, "Please." I nearly stumbled. Lisa caught my arm. "You felt it too," she said softly. "Yes." Caelan slowed his pace, eyes scanning the roadside markers. "It's stronger here. Whatever's rewriting the current, it's anchored to the citadel." "Malric," Maren said. I did not answer. Justicar Malric, the man who had placed his hand on my shoulder when I first swore my oath, the man who had told me doubt was the enemy of order. The man who had smiled as he sent a kill squad to silence me. If he was siphoning divine essence, if he was forcing Solon's authority through a channel that no longer carried consent, then Dawnspire was not a sanctuary. It was a conduit, and we were walking directly into its heart. Oh, illusions at the threshold. The first illusion struck just beyond the outer walls. We were still a mile from the gate when the air thickened. The sky dimmed, though the sun had not yet set. The wind ceased, sound bent. Then I saw them, pilgrims, dozens of them, kneeling along the roadside. Robes torn, faces gaunt, hands outstretched toward me. "Protector," one whispered. "Why did you abandon us?" Another cried. A child clutched a broken sigil of Caelan and stared up at me with hollow eyes. My throat tightened. "I never—" "They're not real," Caelan said sharply, but they felt real. I could see the tear tracks on their faces. I could smell the smoke clinging to their garments. Behind me, Keth growled. "More tricks!" The pilgrims began to chant. "Obey the light. Obey the light. Obey the light." Their voices synchronized unnaturally, rising in volume until the air trembled. I reached for my divine sight. The moment I did, pain lanced through my skull. The illusion flared brighter, the pilgrim's eyes glowing gold. "Caelan," Marin's voice cut through the haze. I dropped to one knee, not from submission, from realization. This wasn't merely an illusion meant to frighten us. It was constructed from my memory. Faces from villages I had protected, faces from villages I had failed. The distortion wasn't inventing guilt, it was weaponizing it. "Don't invoke," Lisa warned. "It feeds on resonance." I forced myself to breathe without prayer, without reaching, without asking. The illusion flickered. The pilgrims' forms blurred at the edges. Keth stepped forward and swung his great axe straight through the nearest kneeling figure. The blade met no resistance. The image shattered like glass. The others fractured in sequence, dissolving into streaks of golden light that twisted upward toward the citadel. "Projection," Caelan muttered, "drawn from your emotional imprint." "So it knows him," Bram said quietly. "Yes," I said. "It does," and in that moment I understood something that chilled me more deeply than any phantom accusation. The force manipulating the divine stream was not blind, it was attentive, it was watching. Keth's truth. We made camp in the shadow of a collapsed watchtower just outside the city's outer perimeter. Entering under cover of darkness would grant us marginal advantage, though I suspected the distortion had already marked our approach. Keth sat apart from the fire, sharpening his axe with methodical strokes. I joined him. For a long while, neither of us spoke. "You ever tell them," he said at last, "what my tribe called this place?" "No." He scraped the blade once more and inspected its edge. "We called it the Cage of the Sun." I frowned. "You said your people worshipped Nullstar." "We did." He looked up, eyes reflecting the firelight. "We called Nullstar the god of unclouded flame, truth without smoke. He didn't give commands, didn't promise glory, just clarity." His jaw tightened. "When the Tribunal came north, they called our rites heresy, said we followed a rebel star, said obedience was the measure of faith." He spat into the dirt. "They burned our sacred grove in Solon's name." The weight of that confession pressed into me like a blade. "I didn't know," I said. "You weren't there." "That's not what I meant." Keth studied me carefully. "You're not them," he said. "Not fully." "Not fully," I echoed. He nodded toward the citadel looming in the distance. "If your lion has chained your son, then this cage isn't holy, it's afraid." His words settled into me with uncomfortable resonance. A god of truth imprisoned, a god of order bound by manipulation, an order built on obedience now fracturing under its own rigidity. "Why follow me?" I asked. Keth's grin returned, fierce, unpolished. "'Cause you hear the lie." He tapped his chest. "And you didn't bow to it." Caelan's admission. Later that night, Caelan joined me on watch. He leaned against the broken stone and studied the skyline. "I expected you to kill her," he said plainly. "The Oracle. I know. I'd seen it before," he continued. "Paladins arriving with divine sanction. Villages corrected, lives rearranged." His gaze did not leave the citadel. "When we met, I thought you were inevitable, and now," he considered, "now I think you're dangerous. That isn't comforting." "It wasn't meant to be." He finally turned to me. "You're dangerous because you're not sure. Men who doubt and still act reshape the world. Men who obey without question simply reinforce it." He rested a hand on his bow. "If you had killed Aric, I would have put an arrow through your throat." I did not doubt him. "I'm glad you didn't need to," I said. "So am I." Silence settled between us. Not hostile, not warm, simply honest. The gate of Dawnspire. We entered the city at first light. The gates of Dawnspire stood open. That, more than anything, unsettled me. Guards lined the entryway, polished armor, radiant sigils, expressions disciplined. They did not lower their weapons. They did not challenge us. They bowed. "Sir Caelan Dawnspear," the captain intoned. "High Justicar Malric requests your presence." "Requests," Marin muttered under her breath. The captain's gaze flicked briefly toward her broken gauntlet before returning to me. "The Tribunal is eager to welcome its prodigal son." The words tasted wrong, but not entirely false. I stepped forward. "We will attend." The captain inclined his head and gestured for us to proceed. As we passed through the gate, the distortion intensified. The marble beneath my boots shimmered faintly. The banners overhead rippled without wind, and beneath it all the divine current pulsed like a heartbeat forced into unnatural rhythm. Solon's presence flickered at the edge of my perception, weak, constrained. Caelan, the voice cut off abruptly, replaced by "obey." I did not respond. Within the lion's den, the streets of Dawnspire were tense. Paladins clustered in quiet conversation. Citizens moved quickly between buildings, eyes wary. I saw fractures everywhere, not in stone, in certainty. Two factions stood visibly opposed, even in posture. Those whose armor gleamed with pristine sigils, and those whose emblems were subtly altered, worn or obscured. Obedientists and interpreters. The fracture had already reached the surface. "Look," Lisa whispered. Ahead, a divine avatar flickered in the plaza. A radiant projection of Solon, meant to reassure the populace. It shimmered unevenly, its outline glitching at the edges. The voice issuing from it echoed slightly out of sync. "Remain steadfast," it proclaimed. "The light is unbroken." Then its form spasmed violently and vanished. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I felt the recoil in my bones. Whatever Malric was siphoning, it was destabilizing more than the order. It was unraveling the god himself. The hall of First Oath. We were escorted into the citadel proper. The hall of First Oath stretched before us. Vaulted ceilings, etched with scripture, stained glass depicting Solon's triumphs. I had knelt here once. I had sworn, "I will be the light's blade. I will obey without hesitation. I will execute judgment without fear." The words rang hollow now. At the far end of the hall stood High Justicar Malric. He looked unchanged. Silver hair, immaculate. Armor, immaculate. Smile, immaculate. "Caelan," he said warmly. The distortion surged. "You've returned." "I have," I replied. His gaze swept over my companions. Marin, Reedwind, Emberward, Iron Walker, Stone Pelt. He knew them all. "An eclectic fellowship," he continued. "I assume you've come to correct your misinterpretation." I held his gaze. "I came for the truth." A flicker crossed his eyes. "Truth," he echoed. "Truth is discipline, Caelan. Truth is alignment with divine command. And if the command is coerced?" The temperature in the hall seemed to drop. Malric's smile did not waver. "You presume much. I have heard Solon's voice fracture. A murmur rippled through the paladins lining the hall. Malric stepped forward slowly. "What you've heard," he said gently, "is the strain of heresy. Doubt amplifies distortion. Obedience clarifies it." He extended a hand toward me. "Kneel, Caelan. Reaffirm your oath. Let the light purge this confusion." For a heartbeat, the hall blurred. I saw myself kneeling. I saw relief wash over the watching paladins. I saw the distortion settle, temporarily, as my doubt was absorbed into compliance. I saw the oracle's blood on my blade. I saw Solon's presence dim further. The vision vanished. "I will not kneel," I said. The words echoed clear, unshaken. Malric's smile finally faltered. "The choice. I did not come to rebel," I continued. "I came because I heard a lie spoken in my God's voice, a sharp intake of breath from somewhere behind me." "You claim divine deception?" Malric asked quietly. "I claim divine coercion." The distortion surged violently. The stained glass windows cracked along their edges. Several paladins staggered. Malric's eyes flashed gold. "You tread dangerously." "I know." I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. "If Solon's will is free, then let him speak without interference." A tremor ran through the hall. The air thickened. For one suspended moment, silence. Then, "Caelan," the voice came through, faint but unfiltered, sorrowful, clear. "I did not command her death." The hall erupted. Paladins shouted. Some drew weapons. Others dropped to their knees in shock. Malric roared in fury, divine energy flaring around him. "Silence him," he snarled, though whether he meant me or the god, I could not tell. The distortion exploded outward, light fractured into jagged shards, and in that chaos I made the only choice left to me, not obedience, not rebellion, witness. I drew my blade, not toward the oracle, not toward Solon, but toward the man who had bound a god in chains of doctrine. "Enough," I said. The lion's den had been entered. Now it would either be broken or break us all. The moment Solon's unfiltered voice reached the hall, the entire chamber convulsed. It was not metaphorical. The marble floor beneath my boots rippled as if it had briefly forgotten how to be stone. The stained glass windows depicting Solon's triumph over Nullstar fractured in spiderweb patterns. Golden light leaking through the cracks like blood through bandages, and High Justiciar Malric screamed. It was not the scream of a wounded man. It was the scream of a conduit losing control. "Seize them," he roared, voice layered with something deeper, metallic and resonant. "Seal the chamber." Half the paladins in the hall moved instantly. The other half hesitated. That hesitation was everything. Marin stepped to my side. Without waiting for instruction, her broken gauntlet catching the light like a badge of dissent. Thalen's bow was in his hands before I heard the string draw taut. Lisa's fire flared, but she did not release it. She held it in check. watching the flow of energy around us like a scholar reading unstable script. Bram moved not toward the enemy, but toward the fallen. Already 2 paladins had collapsed from the backlash of Solan's interrupted transmission. Keth grinned terse. I was hoping it would come to this, he muttered. The distortion in the hall thickened into visible strands, luminous threads spiraling between the vaulted ceiling and the high Justicar's raised hands. I could see it clearly now. A lattice of forced radiance pulled taut, channeling divine current through sigils etched into the floor beneath his feet. The Hall of First Oath was not merely ceremonial. It was engineered, and Malric stood at its center like a nail driven through heaven. You hear only what your weakness allows, he shouted at me. The god's will must be focused, refined, directed. Directed by you? I demanded. He smiled then, not warm, not paternal, predatory, by necessity, by the fracture among the faithful. A paladin stepped forward from the ranks lining the hall. Sir Damaris. I had trained beside him for 6 years. He met my eyes. Caelan, he said hoarsely. Tell me you didn't fabricate that. I didn't. Solan spoke. Yes, without... He glanced at Malric. Without mediation, yes. Damaris looked as though someone had pulled the foundation from beneath him. Another paladin shouted, It's blasphemy. He's being influenced. Influenced by what? Marin snapped. Conscience? Steel rang out as 2 factions collided. Not yet in full combat, but in posture, in shield angle, in refusal to step aside. The obedientists formed a semicircle around Malric. The interpreters, those who had begun to question. Idzu, Desinade, edged closer to us. The Tribunal had not merely fractured, it had chosen sides. Malric's voice dropped low, controlled. You force my hand, Caelan. His gauntleted palm slammed down against the central sigil carved into the floor. The lattice above us ignited. Every radiant line in the hall flared, blinding white. The distortion surged through my skull like molten metal. I dropped to one knee, blade clattering against stone. Solan's presence screamed across my senses, not in pain, but in strain. He was being pulled, dragged through the conduit. Bram, Lisa cried. I see it, he shouted back. The runes, etched into the marble, were drawing divine essence, like a siphon draws water. Malric had converted the oath chamber into a focusing array, a ritual of devouring. I realized with dawning horror that this had likely been in place for years, dormant, subtle, incremental, not a single violent theft, but a slow redirection, a redefinition of what the god's voice sounded like. Standing without invocation, my instinct screamed at me to pray, to invoke, to counter with equal force. But I remembered the road, the illusions feeding on resonance, the way divine energy fractured when forced. If I invoked here, in this chamber designed to amplify and redirect, I would strengthen his conduit. So I did something I had never done in battle before. I stood without reaching upward, without calling Solan's name, without asking for strength. I relied on muscle and memory, on breath and blade. Marin met my eyes and understood immediately. No channeling, she shouted to the interpreters. Physical engagement only. Thalen's first arrow flew, not glowing, not bless, but perfectly aimed. It struck one of the focusing crystals embedded along the wall. The crystal shattered, sending a cascade of sparks across the floor. The lattice flickered. Malric snarled. You think restraint will save you? He bellowed. Light answers. Discipline. No, I replied, and the light answers truth. I lunged. Our blades met with a crash that echoed through the hall. His strength was unnatural, not because he was stronger than me, but because the chamber fed him. Every swing carried the weight of amplified radiance. I parried low, angled, drove him off center, not to overpower him, but to force him away from the central sigil. He pivoted with disturbing grace. "You were my finest student," he said through clenched teeth, "and you will not be remembered as a traitor." I never sought remembrance. Our swords locked. Only honesty. The hall becomes a battlefield. Behind us, the chamber dissolved into controlled chaos. Paladins clashed, some invoking light out of habit, others suppressing it mid-swing. Every time divine energy flared, the lattice above us pulsed brighter, feeding Malric's ritual. Lysa pivoted to containment mode. She cast arcs of controlled flame, not radiant, not holy, weaving them through the lattice strands. Her fire disrupted the resonance, creating pockets of instability. "Bram," she shouted, "ye..." Bram had already identified it. A massive anchor crystal embedded behind the statue of Solon at the hall's rear. He sprinted toward it, hammer raised. Keth barreled through 3 armored obedientists with sheer brute force, refusing to invoke anything beyond muscle and fury. "Truth doesn't need your glow," he roared as he slammed his axe into a secondary focusing pillar. The pillar cracked. The lattice above us flickered again. Malric felt it. His strikes grew more desperate. "You think breaking stone will unmake order?" he hissed. "No," I said, deflecting a downward arc aimed at my collarbone. "But it might free a god." His eyes blazed. "You would unchain chaos?" "I would unchain consent." That word hit him harder than my blade. For the first time, doubt flickered in his expression, just for a heartbeat, and in that heartbeat, I saw it. He did not believe himself evil. He believed himself necessary. The divine stream had grown unstable. Voices had fractured. Gods had weakened, and he had decided that control was preferable to collapse. He had not set out to bind Solon. He had set out to preserve him by redefining him. Solon's struggle. The lattice convulsed violently. A projection of Solon's avatar flickered above us. Not the polished image shown to citizens in the plaza, but a raw, incomplete manifestation. He appeared weary, fractured. Threads of light bound his arms and shoulders like spectral chains. His gaze found mine. "Caelan." The voice trembled but remained clear. "Do not let him sever them all." "What?" I shouted upward. Malric swung hard, nearly cleaving through my guard. "He will fracture the others," the Justicar roared. "If I do not hold them, the Pantheon will scatter. Other gods, the weakening avatars, the purges." This was not only about Solon. Malric had expanded his ritual beyond a single deity. He was anchoring multiple divine channels through the Tribunal's infrastructure. If the lattice collapsed too violently, it might not free them. It might shatter them. Bram reached the northern node and hesitated. "Caelan," he shouted, "if I break this fully, the backlash could tear the chamber apart." "How long until it stabilizes?" Marin demanded, deflecting a strike from a loyalist paladin she had once mentored. "It won't," Bram called back. "Not cleanly." Lisa's fire sputtered as the lattice flared again. Malric laughed, not madly, but grimly. "You see," he said to me, "you cannot dismantle the system without destroying what it sustains." "Then we won't dismantle it," I said. I drove my blade low, sweeping his legs. He staggered half a step. "Where is the primary anchor?" He smiled. "You stand on it." The lion's heart, the central sigil beneath our feet, pulsed brighter. The oath circle, where every paladin swore unquestioning obedience, where authority had been ritualized. The conduit was not merely magical, it was doctrinal. Every oath sworn in this hall had reinforced the structure. Every vow of absolute obedience had thickened the channel. Malric had not created the system alone. We had built it with him. I felt the weight of my own words echo through the stone. "I will obey without hesitation. I will execute judgment without fear." I looked at Marin. She understood before I spoke. "The oath," she breathed. "Yes." We had to fracture the foundation, not with force, but with redefinition. I planted my blade point down into the central sigil. Malric's eyes widened. "You would desecrate. I would amend." I raised my voice so that it carried across the hall. "Hear me." Some fought on, some paused. The lattice pulsed, straining. "I swore to obey the light without hesitation," I said. "I swore to execute judgment without fear." My voice did not tremble, but I was wrong. The words cracked through the chamber louder than any clash of steel. "I will not obey what violates conscience. I will not execute what lacks truth. I will serve the light, but not those who bind it." The sigil beneath my blade shuddered. Malric lunged for me. Marin intercepted him, her broken gauntlet locking against his wrist. "Finish it," she shouted. "I amend my oath," I declared, pressing the blade deeper into the carved lines. "I will choose the just path, even against command." The sigil split. Not explosively, deliberately. A fracture line ran through the central circle, branching outward like lightning etched into stone. The lattice above us convulsed. Threads snapped, not all, but enough. Solin's avatar straightened slightly, the chains loosening around one arm. Malric screamed. No, he tried to channel more force through the array, but the conduit no longer aligned cleanly. Too many paladins had heard, too many had hesitated. Damaris stepped forward, placing his blade point down beside mine. "I amend my oath," he said hoarsely. Another joined, then another. The central circle fractured further. The lion's den began to collapse, not in rubble, but in doctrine. Not yet victory. The lattice did not shatter. It destabilized. Malric staggered backward, clutching at the air as if trying to grab fleeing light. "You fools," he whispered. His armor dimmed. The radiant glow that once haloed him faded to a thin sheen, but the distortion remained. Anchored deeper, beneath the hall, in the substructure, in chambers we had not yet reached. The siphoning ritual was wounded, not ended. Malric looked at me with something new in his eyes. Not rage, fear. "You do not understand what you've begun?" he said quietly. "Then explain it," I replied. He laughed weakly. "You will see soon enough." With a sudden surge of remaining energy, he struck the floor with his palm. The stone beneath him dissolved into blinding light, and he vanished. The lattice recoiled violently. The hall plunged into heavy, trembling silence. Solin's avatar flickered once more. His gaze met mine. "The lower vaults," he whispered. "He draws from the imprisoned star. Null Star. The ancient force beneath the ruins." Malric had extended the conduit all the way down. This was never only about controlling Solin. It was about controlling the fracture itself. The hall settled. Dust drifted through fractured beams of sunlight. Around me, Paladin stood breathing hard, staring at the cracked sigil beneath our feet. The oath had changed, not universally, not officially, but undeniably. Marin stepped to my side. "We didn't end it," she said quietly. "No, but we broke something." "Yes." Thalin approached, retrieving an arrow from a shattered crystal. "You forced the mask to slip," he said. "That matters." Keith rested his axe across his shoulder. "So," he rumbled, grinning, "we go in deeper into the cage?" I looked toward the shattered floor where Malric had vanished, toward the lower vaults, toward the chamber where Nullstar's imprisoned essence waited. I felt Solin's presence again, weaker than he should have been, but freer than before. "Choose," he whispered. I nodded, not to command, not to authority, to truth. "We finish this," I said, and together we stepped toward the broken heart of the lion's den.